Hillsdale College. Quote, "Once upon a time, hardly anyone dissented from the idea that the United States of America was different from other nations." Close quote. President Barack Obama in France in 2009, quote, "I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism." Close quote. Norman, how did we go from once upon a time, when everybody understood this country was different, to, oh well, we're no different from the Brits or the Greeks? What happened?
Well, the corruption of the culture is what happened. Our educational system, starting practically in kindergarten, has inculcated a view of the United States which was very different from the one that people of our generation grew up with. American history is generally seen as a series of oppressions of one group or another. This has led, at the very least, to what we nowadays call a multiculturalist perspective, which all cultures are equal, except for ours. We are exceptional in the sense of being exceptionally bad.
Right.
Now, the point I made in that talk stands, I believe. I mean, even today, I think most people outside of the United States regard us as exceptional in the sense of different. The only debate, and that debate began with the very founding of the country, was whether this exceptionalism was a good thing or a bad thing. There were passionate views on both sides of that issue. As time went on, the exceptionalism of the United States, that is the fact that it was distinctive, different from all other countries on the face of the earth, became more and more manifest. And if we had time, I could list some of the symptoms. But hardly anyone until recently would have said the United States is no different from other countries.
Bernard, by upbringing and temperament and deportment, you remain in all kinds of ways an Englishman. Do you buy all this business of American exceptionalism, or do people like Norman and me get carried away?
No, I think there is an American exceptionalism, but I'm not sure that we wouldn't define it in the same way. I first came to this country as a visitor in 1956, and came many times after that, and then finally moved here in 1974. And I vividly remember my first impressions as a newcomer, some positive, some negative. The first negative impression that I had was the pattern of discrimination by race, by sex, by religion, by all kinds of things. So the sort of thing which in England would have been unknown and impossible. Hotels that wouldn't accept guests of this or that kind. The positive thing, which again very different from us, was the acceptance of the newcomer. In England, and this I know personally because I was part of the British service during the war, in England, for any position of trust, you had to have at least 2 generations of British birth. So, for example, the career of a Kissinger would have been impossible in England, not because he was Jewish. We had Jews rising to the highest positions, but because he was a naturalized immigrant. On the other hand, the career of a Margaret Thatcher would have been impossible in America. It was a woman who became the leader of her party, led it through an election, won that election, and formed a government.
Do you want to push back a little bit?
Yeah, there's no question that we have.
We'll be mud wrestling in just a moment.
There's no question that we have a history of discrimination against various groups, but that history is also marked by efforts, powerful efforts, to overcome those defects. And Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves, once said memorably that I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just. And you might take that as a prescient or prophetic statement about what was to come. And what was to come was the bloodiest war the United States had ever fought and still has ever fought, the Civil War, which more Americans were killed than in any other war we've been involved in. This is a measure of the extent to which this country has struggled to overcome some of the defects, slavery being the most serious. But you could point to other fields,
Right.
which were areas of discrimination in 1956, which are not only no longer areas of, but just the opposite, positive
Exactly.
discrimination.
Right.
I mean,
American exceptionalism in the world. Again, two quotations. Once again, President Obama speaking in 2009 in Cairo. Quote, "We meet at a time of great tension between the United States and Muslims. Tension has been fed by colonialism that denied rights and opportunities to many Muslims, and a Cold War in which Muslim-majority countries were too often treated as proxies." Close quote. Quotation number 2, Bernard Lewis in the interview in the Jerusalem Post in 2011. Quote, "People who talk about American imperialism in the Middle East either know nothing about America or know nothing about the Middle East."
or both.
Or both. Bernard, so the President of the United States, at some basic level, did not know what he was talking about in Cairo.
No, that's not unprecedented.
What is it that he doesn't understand about the United States and or the Middle East to suggest that we've been imperialists there? Or at a
Well,
minimum, overbearing there?
It depends what you mean by imperialism. I think that one might not unreasonably use the term imperialist to describe some of the processes by which the original small group of states increased to the present number. But as applied to American policy,
The Western migration,
Yes, yes.
right, in this.
but
of
as
the United
applied to
States.
American policy in the Middle East, it is absurdly inappropriate. I mean, to take the two classical examples of imperialism, when the Romans went to Britain 2,000 years ago, or when the British went to India 300 years ago, an exit strategy did not figure prominently among their concerns.
So the United States, the American role in the Middle East, let's say from the end of the Second World War, when FDR has his famous meeting on shipboard with the King of Saudi Arabia, right through the invasion of Iraq, was on balance benign.
Yes,
You'd argue that?
I would agree. That was certainly.
Well,
It was sometimes mistaken, but it was never malevolent.
it's fascinating that you bring up that meeting with the was it
What was
King
the first
Saud.
King Saud?
King
Right.
Saud. When you look back, it's astonishing to realize that Roosevelt was more worried about British imperialism than about Soviet imperialism.
Yeah.
And this is a measure of the American attitude toward imperialism. I mean, here was a WASP aristocrat, and you would expect to be Anglophile and passionate about defending England. And he thought the great danger that we faced in the post-war period was British imperialism. I mean,
And Eisenhower scotched the Suez
well, same reason.
operation.
The same reason. So there was an anti...
on behalf of Egypt
right,
and
exactly.
against Israel, France, and Britain.
Exactly. And there's an anti-imperialist streak in American political culture that is much deeper than anything that you could legitimately describe as imperialism. I mean, we invaded Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein. Now, if we had been engaged in an imperialist adventure at that point, we would have settled in permanently,
Right,
run the
exactly.
country, exploited it. As many opponents of the invasion said, we were there for the oil. Well, not only were we not there for the oil, we helped them restore their production of oil. And you could almost say that the United States, in its adventures abroad, was more exploited than exploiter from an economic point of view, certainly.